The Baltimore Ravens continue down their 2023 offseason path, and we talk about the ideal offseason checklist for the Baltimore Ravens coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here today on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for being here with us, tuning in, making us your first listen today. Free and available on all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make everyone want more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Here with me again for another Purple Friday episode is former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and a Super Bowl champion as well, Qadry Ismail. And Q, the Ravens are chugging along. It's officially 2023 offseason season as the Super Bowl is over. Chiefs win it. Patrick Mahomes wins his second Super Bowl. How'd you like the game?
Loved the game. I thought the game was extremely entertaining. I know that the elephant in the room is the holding call that James Bradberry had on Juju Smith-Schuster. Now, all of a sudden, it's become that of legend when Juju goes ahead and acts like a weirdo and tweets out what he tweets out about James Bradberry being able to hold you when it is needed the most. Oh, my gosh. But, I just thought that the whole game, such, beautiful back and forth play that emphasized, the level of offense and the creativity. And then, the one undercurrent that has been really not talked about was the $800,000 turf, the sod that was laid down. This special sod, like back in the day, you would have, bluegrass. Then it was, well, if you're in a southern climate, you can have what is called the Bermuda grass. And those different grass would give you a feel. And then they had these different hybrid grass that you had at Lambeau. And they would pump water in and keep it from freezing. And all that being said, literally, like this $800,000 turf, I think, as much as we want to talk about James Bradberry, you also talking about just, guys slipping really, really bad in key moments. And a defensive line that straight dominated the whole year was non-existent, to the fact that Orlando Brown Jr. might have earned him some extra couple $100 million. Then at the same time, when it comes to the merchandising, he has himself a little something because of the 0 sacks. So, love the game. Love it. It was awesome. All of it was awesome. But that turf, that's crazy that you got the grandest stage. They go ahead and they try to get cute with it. And in the process, it wound up being as bad as it was.
Yeah, people were slipping and sliding all over the place on that turf. And I know for the Ravens, Q, multiple pieces of news came out on Super Bowl Sunday for them, with one of them being that Baltimore is expected, I'd say, to speak with both Eric Bieniemy and Brian Johnson, Bieniemy being the Chiefs offensive coordinator and Johnson being the Eagles quarterback coach. And both those guys, I think, very deserving, and Bieniemy for a head coaching job especially. But regardless, the Ravens go with someone different. We're talking offseason checklist today. I know, Q, there are 2 big points, or at least there were 2 big points at the top of everybody's checklist. One of them being the offensive coordinator position. Who is it going to be? It was a very long, very extensive search. But Todd Monken is the guy they go with. Georgia's offensive coordinator, also stints with Tampa and Cleveland at the NFL levels, their offensive coordinator. What was your reaction when you heard Todd Monken was the guy for them?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I knew he had some play in the NFL, but it wasn't until my colleague who tweeted it out so perfectly his offense as far as receivers and what they did. So once you did that, I kind of flashed back real quick to when I did see, OBJ and also Jarvis Landry, the way they were able to play and phenomenal job they did. I love the way Mike Evans was playing and being productive. So that to me was what I needed to see. And then it kind of went into and morphed into this um, deep dive of exactly what are the Ravens getting. I love the fact that, he talks about the air raid offense. Ironically enough, from a familial aspect of things, my son, who is in his final COVID year of eligibility down at Samford, their coach, he runs a pure air raid style of offense. So I was very familiar when Monken, I keep wanting to put a T in his name. Okay, Qadry. Well, Monken, his offense is a variation of the air raid, but it is, with a lot of pro principles. And with the style that he has, it's what talent do I have and how do I feature said talent? And so at Georgia, where he had some really good tight ends, 2 running backs, and he got some receivers, don't get me wrong, but he featured his playmakers and he got them the ball an awful lot, just as he did in the league. That to me shows the versatility of his creative mind. And that's where I was smiling like, okay, I think Baltimore got their guy.
Yeah, I think they did a very good job with this hire. And Monken is very adaptable, as you kind of talked about a little bit there. He comes from an air raid background. He likes to throw the ball, but he has had success with heavy personnel, which I think is great because Baltimore can keep the stuff that they did really well under Greg Roman, and then have Monken come in and kind of bring in innovative and creative ideas for the things and the areas where Baltimore really needs it. I mean, for example, during Monken's last year at Tampa Bay, he had the second best passing offense in the league, went to Cleveland next year and had the 4th best rushing offense in the league. So it's these versatile options that Monken gives you. And I know myself included, a lot of people want to see Lamar Jackson in this offense. And when talking about an offseason checklist, it felt like Lamar and the offensive coordinator position were those two that were at the top of everybody's checklist. Will Lamar play in Baltimore? Who's the offensive coordinator going to be? Now with that offensive coordinator position checked off, to me, it feels like, at least at the top of my checklist, is figuring out a solution to the Lamar Jackson situation. Is there anything, Hugh, on your checklist for the offseason for Baltimore that tops that, or is Lamar number one for you?
Well, Lamar is number one. I mean, we can speculate. As a matter of fact, I'm going to speculate. There's going to be some more speculation about where he's going to sign and potentially get traded, says some speculative source that will go unnamed about the speculation that could or could not happen within the realm of possibilities that really no one knows.
Oh, man. It has
I'm just
been,
saying.
yeah, it's been speculation everywhere. I mean, and look, there have been it feels like 20 million reports of the same thing, just spun in different ways for, where's Lamar going to go? Is he going to be here? Is he going to be there? And part of this also is the offensive coordinator search in itself. I know, Q, there was always going to be some sort of tie with Lamar Jackson to the offensive coordinator position and the offensive coordinator position to Lamar Jackson. And there have been plenty of reports about just how much input Lamar had to the offensive coordinator position. Now you have Josina Anderson putting out that they valued both Lamar's input and the input of key players. But then Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports comes out and says that Lamar didn't have input. And then Jess Rebeck was asked about it from The Athletic, and it was his understanding that Lamar did have it. So it's just back and forth. And look, for me, I'm putting my trust in Josina Anderson and Jess Rebeck over Jonathan Jones. I just feel like those two have been more consistent. If many don't remember, Jonathan Jones was the one who asked Lamar during the offseason last year during training camp. He said, "Oh, my sources said that, you don't like working out." And Lamar's like, "What? Like, who said that?" And he's like, "My sources." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" So
Right.
It's like everybody has to have an opinion, I guess, or have an input on it. So in your estimation, Q, based off of anything that you are speculating, as that is the key word of the day, do you feel like Lamar did have an impact on who was this offensive coordinator? And if he did, do you feel like that's a positive sign?
So I think from what has been talked about, he had, an understanding of as far as like what he wanted, and wasn't necessarily involved in the 14 candidates in 21 days or something like that. He wasn't necessarily in that process of every single one, but he expressed what he would like to see. And from that, I guess you as a reporter, an insider, you rely upon the agents, general managers, some scouts to give you this juicy information. And there's this one key piece that's missing, and that's Lamar Jackson's representative is him and his mom. And they've done an amazing job. In 5 years, you don't hear nothing from them. Everything is close to the vest. And it drives said insiders nuts. And in driving them frustratingly nuts, their minds, it's like, okay, my job depends upon me breaking news, and I don't have any news to break on the biggest story of the year, which is Lamar Jackson. And that's in unto itself the frustration, I think, for for all of them. Like, let's just figure something out and let's make up stuff. So I think from the Monken aspect of things to whomever else was, talked about how can you help out Lamar, I think it was a good thing. But I don't think also, yes, while it was a good thing, I don't think it also was something where it turned into a scenario where, well, Lamar wasn't consulted, or, Lamar, he was, but see, he felt that the way in which they were talking to him wasn't appropriate, and he didn't like the color of the one pair of shoes that the one guy wore when he came into the building, and so that canceled out any kind of like connection that Lamar could have potentially. Now y'all just straight tripping and making things up. That's the frustrating part about this silliness of this offseason.
And I think there are probably different opinions and different ideas as to like what Lamar being involved means or what that looks like. I don't think they were sending Lamar a 20-page PowerPoint on every single candidate and asking like, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? Like, I don't know if it was all that, but I do think, based off what we have heard, that it seems like the Ravens said, hey, what would you like? What's your input? How are you feeling? How do you feel like the offense can get better? Where do you feel like our strengths and weaknesses? It's like they're asking for the input, I feel like, is what's being put out there, instead of, Lamar sitting in on every single interview and him conducting the interview himself. Like, I don't think it was all of that, but from what's being put out there from Josina Anderson, from Jeff Rebeck, I feel like they asked him and said, hey, what do you want? What would you value in an offense for us? But obviously with his uncertainty and the reports coming out about, the Ravens couldn't make any assurances, and obviously they can't because Lamar's not back in Baltimore yet, then there's a different situation of, I think Todd Monken is going to be able to do a job both with or without Lamar. Now, obviously, an offense with Lamar is much better than one without it. We just have to wait and see. It's definitely the Lamar situation is at the top of the checklist. For now, as the offensive coordinator position is checked off completely. But coming up, we'll be diving into what else is on the Ravens offseason checklist: wide receiver, cornerback, and so much more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. And it is All-Star Weekend coming up in the NBA, so 3-point contest, dunk contest, All-Star Game MVP. Those money lines will be moving. I'll be looking at those on FanDuel, and they have so many more exclusive bets like the 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay, so don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet. It's $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Qadry Ismail and Q. Obviously, we've established Lamar Jackson #1 on the Ravens offseason checklist, and it's not even really a debate. Like, that is the situation. that needs to be resolved next. Hopefully, we'll see what happens, franchise tag, extension, trade, whatnot. But there are other areas that the Ravens need to address throughout this offseason. And I know one that we have talked about at length throughout the course of the past year or so, and even longer than that, is wide receiver. And for me, if Lamar is number one, I think just figuring out the wide receiver room is number two. Are you in that mindset, or is there something that trumps wide receiver for you?
Well, remember in John Harbaugh's ending of the year press conference, I mean, that was one of the things he said, this room is going to look different. I don't think it's a bad thing per se that he's in a position where he has to go out. Well, maybe not him, but I think Eric DeCosta has to go out and retool the room. And obviously, whether it be a scenario where they're going to be a free agency, whether it's going to be, uh, you know, college and who's coming out and what, fits the scheme that they're trying to look to. Obviously, Monken is going to have some say in that. So yeah, I think the retooling of the room signified to me that priority number one. You already have done it. There, been there, done that. Running the football. You've taken care of rushing the passer. You've taken care of the linebacking core. Patrick Queen still in flux, but you've for the most part taken care of that. You've taken care of the tight end position. You've taken care of the cornerback position, safety position, via free agency and draft. Elephant in the room. Let's go ahead. Let's get it. Let's go ahead and start it off with the receivers.
And it's big, especially in this Monken-led offense, where I think everybody talks about the tight end usage with Monken. I get that, but I think wide receiver wise, this is a coordinator who can adapt to his personnel. And I think if you give a wide receiver to Todd Monken, that is a number one, like a DeAndre Hopkins or a Mike Evans or Chris Godwin or whoever. I know we've talked about those guys, Q. He can make those guys work, where I feel like in a Greg Roman-led offense, the entire conversation was, well, this guy's going to come to Baltimore and get 3 targets a game because they're never going to throw it to him because the pass offense runs through the tight ends, which, I don't want to make this sound like I don't like Mark Andrews as a top. Like, Mark Andrews is really, really good and really good at what he does, and you want to give him the football. But I just think there have to be other options and other ways to get others involved in that offense, especially at wide receiver. I think Monken can definitely do that, and so we'll see what they do, whether it is a trade or a couple free agents or even a high draft pick. Maybe that's what they do. They decide to go another draft pick, and if we're following trends, Q, 2019 first round pick Marquise Brown, 2021 first round pick Rashad Bateman. Every 2 years, 2023, maybe the first round pick is a wide receiver again. So yeah. we'll figure out what they do there. But I think on the opposite side of the ball, you mentioned some of the positions that they've really shored up and that you feel pretty good at, especially safety. I mean, safety right now for me is probably like one I feel the most comfortable at outside of, I think, defensive line, depending on if Calais Campbell comes back. We'll talk about that in the final segment. But I think corners at one, Q, that's right under wide receiver for me, because you have Marlon Humphrey. We all know who Marlon Humphrey is. Marlon, one of the best corners in the game, all pro, great bounce back season. After Marlon Humphrey, though, there's not a lot. There's not a lot behind Marlon Humphrey. Marcus Peters had a very up and down season, I'll call it. He's a free agent too, so you don't know whether he's going to be able to come back or whether he wants to come back or not. Then you're looking at Brandon Stevens and Jalen Armour-Davis and Pepe Williams and Daryl Worley. It just feels like I would like them to go back to the days when we saw like the Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Carr, Jimmy Smith 3-man rotations, or the Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith 3-man rotations. 3 guys who you can trust. You don't have to play them every single snap altogether, but you can have that healthy cornerback rotation. I mean, how big is it for Baltimore to kind of revamp that depth behind Marlon Humphrey this offseason on your checklist?
I think it's huge. I think you have to look at, the league itself, and it is a passing league. It is a division that prides itself on, getting the ball out to its playmakers. Pickett is up and coming. He's going to be, a special player. I'm sure him and Monken are going to be, high-fiving one another in pregame. You go ahead and go over to Cleveland. All I know is Amari Cooper is a baller, and they're only going to get better. David Ajabo, no. Am I saying his name correctly? The tight end from Cleveland. But
David Njoku?
Njoku. Ajabo Njoku. My apologies. That's like saying Qadry and Ragib. Ha. But Njoku, his skill set is one of a receiver as well. So you need that strong corner presence when, they try to scheme him open. You clearly look at what Jamar Chase and company and Higgins and the way in which they go out there. Tyler Boyd is like phenomenal. I think looking at that position, you can't have enough good corners, and you got to if you want to compete in this division.
I think also you look at the role Kyle Hamilton played. They kind of played him as that big nickel corner this year, but I'm curious to see whether they envision him in that role full time or if
Yeah,
they really want to begin using him more as in that roaming position. You can put him all over the field, and I feel like if you had a more sure thing or a couple more sure things at corner, you can still play Hamilton in the nickel if you really want to. Like, I'm not saying they shouldn't just completely take him out forever, but I think it gives you more versatility and it gives you more options. And you kind of mentioned the way the league is going, the way this division is set up right now. Having a couple good corners, and especially for a team that invests so much in their secondary and has invested so much in their secondary over the course of the last, I don't even know how many years it is now, but they are, investing defense. And now that all could change if Lamar does get this extension from the Ravens, and then you're putting a lot more money in offense moving forward. But corner is a huge position in what this league is nowadays. It's not everything, but you kind of have your top number one shutdown guy. If you put the pieces around that number one shutdown guy, a couple more depth options that can be, you can have two quality number two guys. Maybe it is a free agent. Maybe it is a draft pick. Maybe they trade for somebody. It's the same thing like wide receiver, but it feels like to me, Q, the top two positional needs outside of Lamar in that whole situation is wide receiver and his cornerback. But coming up on our final segment, we'll be wrapping up our checklist, talking a bit about Calais Campbell, some roster moves, and more. So be sure to stay tuned. So lots to dive into on the show. But first, this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. And you've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and I can't tell you how much fun I've had competing against my fellow Locked On NFL hosts. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers was the Locked On NFL champion. I wanted to win, but it just didn't happen. Well, now it's your turn to compete, but more on that later. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager, managing your football franchise, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory, trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of a season. And there are so many different ways that you can build your dynasty, create the ultimate franchise that has a super great experience in so many different aspects, and you can compete with your friends and family as well. And all this in a challenging, realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. You can play on the go as you want and when you want to. You created Locked On leagues for you to compete against Locked On fans all over the world. Can you be the ultimate Locked On Football GM? Choose the Locked On League in the app to join. Can you create a football dynasty? Locked On Ravens listeners are getting a 100% free boost of their franchise using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure to check it out today. Down on the game, says at ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. We are back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Olshaker still here with Qadry Ismail and Q as we round out our offseason checklist, our ideal offseason checklist. We have Lamar number one, wide receiver number two, corner number three. Is there any other aspect of the offseason that you think Baltimore should have listed on their checklist to make sure they get figured out before the season starts?
Yeah, I think the backup quarterback situation. I know that there's been a lot of talk on, the way in which the offense can be installed. Stetson Bennett, if he is going undrafted and there's potential to pick him up, obviously he knows Monken's offense and Monken can, get him in. It would be great to see him establish. But at the same time, that means that, Tyler Huntley, if they decide to put him as a second round tenure, then from a free agency standpoint, if somebody picks him up and they get a second round pick, I mean, that's significant dollars for Tyler. But then there's also an opportunity for the Ravens to get another draft pick. So those are some of the things that I'm looking at like, when you look at it on paper and when you talk about it out loud, you got to build your roster. And I think that that's something that would kind of be intriguing to see the backup quarterback position.
Yeah, and I know there was speculation about Baker Mayfield earlier this week. I know just Rebeck putting out an
Oh, I
article
forgot about that one.
that was one where I know for people thought that was Baker Mayfield as the starter for the Ravens, and everyone was like, "What, Baker Mayfield? What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
But is a backup option. I know that's something that just Rebeck told everybody to monitor, and maybe something that could happen. So we'll see there. Also, I think for me, I agree with you. Backup quarterback for sure. Also, I think left guard is one that we should be looking
Wow.
at
Absolutely.
because Ben Powers
He ain't
feels
coming through
like
that door.
feels like he's not walking back through that Ravens door. Feels like he's going to
Yeah.
get paid and deserves it. He played really well. He deserves to get paid. I feel like that depends on what happens with Lamar. That's why we put Lamar number one in terms of if Lamar doesn't get that extension or doesn't get the franchise tag, there'll be more money to operate with, assuming they don't go out there and sign a mid-tier or trade for a mid-tier option. Maybe you bring Powers back, but in all likelihood, Powers is probably going to get priced out and go somewhere else. So is that a draft pick? Is it Ben Cleveland? Are you trusting a veteran in that slot? So that's something else that we should monitor definitely. But also, what's the status of some of these veterans still on the roster and also free agent wise? Kevin Zeitler, you can save, I
Yeah.
think, $7 million if you're the Ravens, or maybe it's $7 or $5 million. Calais Campbell, same thing for me. Q, with these salary cap casualties, I always say whenever you get rid of somebody, there's a hole in your roster you have to fill. So with Zeitler, he's been a Pro Bowl snub the past 2 years. With Campbell, it was announced he was returning for his 16th season, put that out on Super Bowl Sunday. But there's the question about just what is he going to look like contract-wise. His cap hit right now is right around $9 million. I think it'd be beneficial to have both those guys back in Baltimore. Maybe you look at restructures with both to make that cap hit a little lower. But I think if you let them go, you're losing two super talented players, and you still have to fill that hole with someone else moving forward who could cost maybe just a little bit less.
And here's the thing too, because if you can also extend them and kick the can again down the road, there's that possibility as well. So those are some options that need to be explored. Which obviously Steve Bisciotti called everybody into the principal's office, and I'm knowing that he loves talking about salary cap and who goes what where, because he isn't fully in the know, although he gets a detailed explanation, but he isn't fully in the know when it comes to his process of just players and personnel and all that. But that salary cap, he's in lockstep with it. And so, what I think ultimately can happen is they get it restructured, and then it kicks the can of the salary cap down the road, which you're saying that every year it's grown. So I think that'd be a wise decision, in particular for both of those guys. Both guys are leaders, and both guys have done extremely well.
Yeah, and I think even for, a Campbell or a Justin Houston, who's a guy who's a free agent, I think it all again ties back to one Lamar Jackson in terms of if they want to go win. I think Lamar, if he's back, and I know Calais Campbell's been a big advocate of Lamar getting back with the team, gives you a good shot. But if it's a rookie and you have one last year left, are you banking a Super Bowl championship, your shot at a Super Bowl on a rookie, or do you look at Kansas City? Do you look at Buffalo or Cincinnati or Philadelphia or San Fran or some of these teams and say, maybe that's where I want to go for my last ride. So we'll see what happens there. But Q, the Ravens also making a couple of roster moves on Wednesday, bringing back both Brent Urban and Daryl Worley. Now, look, these are not moves where I'm saying the Ravens are going to the Super Bowl. They're going to win. They're winning the Super Bowl because they got these guys back. But look, you need depth at the NFL level. You need to have solid, cheap depth that can come in maybe in a spot start or give you a good snap somewhere. I think Urban showed flashes last year and showed that he can be a solid run defender in limited action. Worley was somebody who was kind of that taxi squad guy where it was like, called up, cut, practice squad, called up, cut, practice squad for like 5 weeks straight, it felt like. But it feels like those two guys, they're going to be pretty good, solid depth options, although not necessarily needle movers.
I think that from a James Urban standpoint, I mean, he had some key moments and some key plays. I think Worley in the beginning, they had to battle by attrition, get in there, and I think ultimately they cost very little against the salary cap. So you're going to need to build your roster some form of fashion. And if these guys are minimal when it comes to the salary cap, then take advantage of it and re-sign them. And obviously that brings a peace of mind to them. It brings some stability within the roster. of the depth that we are looking at, and I think it's a win-win for both the club as well as the player.
Yeah, and speaking of the salary cap and how the Ravens are going to maneuver certain positions, the Ravens did sign Roquan Smith to that 5-year, $100 million contract during the season. Deserved, uber well deserved for
Yeah.
Roquan Smith. But it does beg the question. It raises the question of Patrick Queen and what's the future of Patrick Queen in Baltimore. And we saw everybody's been freaking out because Patrick Queen both wiping his Instagram and Twitter of Raven stuff, as we saw with Kyler Murray last offseason with the Cardinals. We've seen it happen with players before. And then Derek Stingley, who was his teammate over at LSU, ended up tweeting eyeball emojis at Patrick Queen. Patrick Queen tweeted them right back. And so everybody's thinking, what's going on here? What is a move? Is there a trade coming? I don't know what the future of Patrick Queen holds, Q, in Baltimore. There's still a couple of years before you really have to truly have that conversation because he still has a couple of years left to pick your option. But is there any chance in your mind? I mean, I guess I want your updated opinion here. Is there any chance that the Ravens do pay big money to two linebackers, or do you feel like for Queen, it's just a numbers game and the Ravens can't have that money committed to that position?
That's what I'm concerned about. Just what you said. I mean, is it a scenario where the Ravens are just going to strictly look at their blueprint and be like, "Yep, this is who we are. This is what we're willing to spend. This is what we're willing to do," and we're not going any further. We got Lamar. We got to figure him out. We know that it's going to be a tough one, but we covet him more than we covet you, and he does have an agent, and so we will get a chance to see some of the leaked stories that would or would not come out because of him having an agent. I actually love him in purple. I think he did a phenomenal job last year, but the market will bear what it'll bear, and it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds for Patrick Queen.
Yeah, and I think for me, it doesn't make a lot of sense to move on from Patrick Queen now unless at the very, very minimum you're getting a second round pick back. Because at the end of the day, if Patrick Queen signs a huge extension somewhere else, if you let him walk in free agency, you're getting back at least a third round comp pick for that. Ideally like third, maybe it's a fourth, depending on the language of the contract. But if you trade him for a third now or a fourth now, which I think his value is probably a little better than that, honestly, just based off his control. He has control, team control him for the next couple of seasons, contract wise. Plus, he is an up and coming player, and we saw what he could do not only just before Roquan Smith, but after Roquan Smith got in there. So I'm saying, look, we see what Patrick Queen did next to Roquan Smith. We saw that duo. The Ravens have a shot to win a Super Bowl with Lamar back and with hopefully some of these changes that will be made during the offseason, that checklist we talked about. I'm saying unless you're getting a high second, early first right now, I'm not moving Patrick Queen, and I'm maybe just waiting for next year to see what happens, because I think that's when you really have to start having that conversation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's not that he's not a priority. It's that you have some wiggle room, leverage within the priority of getting it done. But that's not going to make Patrick Queen any happier. I mean, he's like, "Yo, give me some money and let's just do this. Lock me in, and I'll be a Raven for life." But that's the song and dance of the offseason. And I think for him, absolutely what he did on the field has built his resume. He's going to play whether you like it or not, Baltimore, and you can get something for him, or if you are foolish enough to let him walk, then that's the consequence that you're going to have to pay.
Yeah, we'll see a bunch of options, a bunch of things to monitor with that situation. Maybe there's something that comes out over the next couple of weeks that says, "Oh, maybe we have to have that conversation now," because I don't know, something crazy happens. But for now, it just feels like Queen's a big part of that defense, and I know might not be as likely anymore that he stays long-term because of the Roquan Smith extension, but I think you can maximize the window where you're able to have both on your roster and then revisit what it's like to have Queen off the roster when it actually comes time for that. So plenty of checklist options for the Ravens. We went over it all here today. Q, I appreciate you hopping on and talking about it with me. And I know we kept talking about maybe next week will be offensive coordinator, maybe next week offensive. We're done with that. Now it's maybe next week we'll have a resolution with the Lamar Jackson situation.
Well, now get to work. Develop something that Lamar, if he looks at, he could be like, "Yep, this is why I chose to stay here." And to be honest with you, I'm curious as to we'll probably never know, but I'm curious as to what exactly did Steve Bisciotti say was the final limit to giving this generational talent a contract that's worthy of his talent and skill sets. I'm curious to be a fly on the wall in there because ultimately this is that new stratosphere of contract negotiation, and the fact that Deshaun Watson is considered an outlier, and you got Lamar Jackson holding fast, and then there's Joe Burrow going to be wanting some, and then of course you talk about Jalen Hurts, who got to the dance before Lamar Jackson did, and did what we thought, or I still think Lamar can do as far as leading his team. So, anywho, with all that said, lots going on when it comes to this contract of Lamar Jackson and how it shapes the team.
Yeah, talking about new stratosphere, we can talk about those Joe Flacco extensions all we want to. This deal will be in a new stratosphere from what those deals were. This is uncharted territory for the Ravens in terms of giving out that much money to one player. Goes against kind of what their roster building philosophies have been, especially on the offensive side of the ball. But when you have a talent like Lamar Jackson, you got to get into a new stratosphere in order to keep a guy like that. So we will see how it develops. Hopefully next week we'll have something concrete about that situation. But I appreciate you, Q. Thanks so much for hopping on. Be sure, if you're here with us, like and subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form. When we get back here on Monday, it's our first mock draft Monday of the 2023 offseason. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you right back here on Monday.